I pulled my cabin suitcase behind me, stepping through the airplane door with the composure of an ordinary passenger. The scent of new leather seats mixed with traces of expensive perfume from the first-class travelers, creating an atmosphere that was both luxurious and strangely unwelcoming. I walked in, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. "Good evening." I gave a polite nod to the flight attendant standing at the entrance. She, Lisa White, according to her name tag, blinked briefly, her gaze scanning me with clear evaluation, but instead of responding politely as she had with the previous passenger, she merely raised an eyebrow and turned away. Not a single word in return. I was no stranger to this kind of treatment. A black man in a simple polo shirt, khakis, and sneakers stepping into first class? She must have thought I didn't belong here. Perhaps, in her mind, I was a rapper, an athlete, or worse, someone who had somehow lucked into a premium seat. I wasn't surprised, but that didn't mean I was okay with it. I pulled my suitcase forward, finding my way to seat 1A. My seat, one of the best on this flight. Just as I was about to settle in, a voice called from behind me. "Excuse me, sir." I turned around. Lisa had approached, arms crossed over her chest. "It seems there's been a mistake. We need you to switch seats. This one has been reserved." I looked at her for a moment, then offered a small smile. "I don't think there's any mistake. I booked this seat in advance, and my ticket confirms it." She blinked, her lips pressing together as if she were holding something back. "I'll have to check with the system. But in the meantime, could you please step aside?" I sighed, pulled out my phone, opened my booking confirmation email, and held it up to her face. "No need to check. Here's the proof. I believe that clears things up, doesn't it?" Lisa stared at the screen for a second before taking a step back. "Very well, sir." Her voice carried reluctance. She turned away, but I caught the irritation in her eyes before she did. I sat down, adjusting my seat for comfort. A middle-aged white couple, seated 2 rows ahead, chatted cheerfully with another flight attendant. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw Lisa return to them with a bright, beaming smile. A smile that was clearly not meant for me. That was fine. I wasn't here for a warm welcome. I was here to observe. As the attendants began serving drinks and meals, I raised my hand to call Lisa over. She approached, her expression barely masking her annoyance. "How may I assist you?" "A glass of water. No ice." Lisa pressed her lips together, nodded, but didn't write down my request as she had done for the other passengers. She turned away without another word. 10 minutes passed. 15 minutes. I glanced around. Every other passenger had been served. Wine glasses, cocktails, and sparkling water sat in their hands. I waited patiently, but when Lisa walked by again, she breezed right past me without acknowledgement. "Excuse me, but I believe you forgot my water?" I asked, my voice still calm. Lisa raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh, I thought you didn't want it anymore. Let me get that for you." Her words were light as air, but I knew the game she was playing. She was doing this on purpose, trying to make me feel unwelcome. A moment later, she returned, holding a glass of water. But instead of handing it to me properly, she tilted her wrist ever so slightly. The entire glass tipped forward, spilling its contents all over my shirt. "Oh my!" "I am so sorry," Lisa gasped, but her tone lacked any real remorse. I clenched my fists, inhaling deeply. I wasn't one to lose my temper easily. But this had gone too far. Now, the real game was about to begin. I looked down at my shirt, the fabric soaked through with ice-cold water, blotched with wet stains. The passengers around me started to take notice. Some cast quick, judgmental glances, while others pretended not to see anything. Slowly, I lifted my head, locking eyes with Lisa. Excuse me, what exactly did you just do? My voice remained calm, but inside, a storm was brewing. Lisa blinked, her expression a picture of exaggerated remorse. It was truly an accident, sir. I didn't mean to. I sincerely apologize. I raised an eyebrow, tilting my head. An accident? You just poured an entire glass of water on me and expect me to believe that? Lisa gave a small shrug, the forced smile still plastered on her face. The flight is crowded, and I was bumped. But if you'd like, I can get you a napkin. She said it as if she were doing me a favor. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the stares around me. A few people shook their heads, while others whispered to each other, but no one spoke up. Then, from the seat next to me, a voice rang out. Are you sure that was just an accident? I turned. A middle-aged Asian man, perhaps in his early 40s, wearing silver-rimmed glasses, sat with his arms crossed, eyeing Lisa with suspicion. Lisa rolled her eyes but kept her tone professional. And who are you? This doesn't concern you. The man leaned back in his seat, smiling slightly. My name is Jacob Lee. I've flown with this airline before, and I've experienced similar treatment from a flight attendant. Coincidentally, I believe it was you. For a brief moment, Lisa's expression faltered. Before she could respond, another flight attendant, David Brooks, approached with an irritated look on his face. What's going on here? Lisa seized the opportunity, turning to David with feigned distress. This gentleman is making a scene over a small accident. I already apologized, but he insists on causing trouble. David shot me a cold glance before shaking his head. Sir, if you're unhappy with your seat, we can arrange for you to be moved elsewhere. I let out a soft chuckle. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for. She's the one who caused this mess, and now you're suggesting that I should be the one to move? David shrugged. We just want to ensure the best experience for all our passengers. I tilted my head. And what about my experience? David smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We don't want a minor incident to disrupt the entire flight. Would you be willing to cooperate? I folded my arms, keeping my gaze locked on Lisa. And if I refuse? David arched an eyebrow before turning to Lisa. Lisa, continue serving the other passengers. I'll handle this. Lisa nodded, throwing me a smug look before walking away. I leaned back in my seat, suppressing a bitter smile. I knew this game. Push the blame onto me, make me lose my patience, then label me as the troublemaker. I turned to Jacob Lee. You've been through this before? Jacob nodded, taking a sip of his wine. Not as extreme as your case, but yeah, I ordered a drink, and they kept forgetting to bring it. After the third time I asked, the attendant gave me a look and told me to be patient like the other passengers. He let out a dry laugh, but there was weariness in his eyes. I filed a complaint, but no one cared. I exhaled slowly. Thanks for speaking up? Jacob shrugged. No problem. But what are you planning to do next? Before I could answer, a female voice spoke from across the aisle. Excuse me, but may I add something? I turned to see a young woman with chestnut-brown hair, dressed in a sharp blue blazer. She held a phone in her hand, her eyes sharp and calculating. My name is Sophia Green. She introduced herself. I'm a human rights attorney, and I recorded the whole incident. David Brooks froze. You? What? Sophia shrugged. I saw everything. And based on what I recorded, there was no accident at all. I'd be happy to share this footage with the airline's management. I looked at Sophia and let out a small, amused smile. Looks like this flight is about to get more interesting than I expected. David clenched his jaw, his face tight with frustration. You can't! Sophia raised her hand. Oh, please, continue. I'm live streaming this, after all. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Some passengers started murmuring, others pulled out their phones to check what was happening. I leaned back, staring directly at David. Now, do you still want to move me to another seat? David's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced at Lisa, then quickly walked away. Lisa's face paled, but she tried to maintain her composure. Without another word, she quietly disappeared from the area, leaving me, Jacob, and Sophia exchanging knowing glances. Jacob chuckled softly, shaking his head. Guess they didn't expect things to turn out this way. I picked up the now empty glass from my table, my shirt still damp. It's too early to say, but trust me, the real game is only just beginning. David Brooks hurried toward the back of the first-class cabin, where the senior flight attendant was conversing with a few colleagues. I didn't need to hear them to guess what he was whispering. Lisa stood nearby, still wearing her arrogant expression, but her clenched hands betrayed her anxiety. I took a sip of the fresh water Sophia had handed me, silently amused. Did they think they could intimidate me? That I was just another nameless black man they could push around? Jacob Lee clicked his tongue and shook his head. Did you notice? When Lisa spilled water on you, no one said a word. But the moment this lawyer raised her phone, they panicked. Sophia shrugged. Not surprising. When there's evidence, they can't deny it anymore. Or maybe they're just scrambling to cover for each other. I was about to respond when a female voice spoke just above me. Excuse me, sir. May I have a private word with you? I looked up. Another flight attendant. Amelia Carter, the senior flight supervisor, stood there, her gaze sharp but her tone softer than Lisa's. I inhaled deeply, then stood. Of course. Amelia led me toward the back of the first-class cabin, where there was less foot traffic. Once we stopped, she clasped her hands together and offered a well-rehearsed smile. Sir, I've been informed about the situation. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience caused by our staff. I folded my arms, tilting my head. Really? And what exactly are you apologizing for? She hesitated for half a second, but quickly regained her composure. We don't want any of our customers to feel dissatisfied. I can assure you that we are handling this internally. I smirked. Handling it internally? Meaning you'll sweep it under the rug and keep Lisa on staff? The corners of Amelia's smile tightened slightly. Sir, I hope you understand that, on a flight, we need to maintain order and avoid causing unnecessary distress among passengers. I crossed my arms. So when Lisa dumped water on me, that wasn't causing distress? When she deliberately ignored me and refused to serve my drink, that wasn't a problem. Amelia remained silent. I could see the slight flicker in her eyes. I'm not asking for pity, I continued, my voice steady but firm. I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for you and this airline to take responsibility for what's happening on your flight. Amelia inhaled deeply. I understand your position, but I must caution you. If you continue to escalate this situation... I let out a sharp laugh, cutting her off. And what will you do? Throw me off the plane? Call security to cuff me for daring to demand fairness? Amelia's face stiffened. She knew I had a point. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You don't know who I am, do you? She frowned. Sir, I don't have the authority to treat passengers differently based on who they are. I chuckled dryly. Good, because I haven't told you yet. But trust me, you're going to regret how your staff treated me today. Amelia pressed her lips together, but before she could reply, a commotion erupted from the first-class cabin. Lisa was arguing with Sophia. I immediately walked back to my seat. Sophia stood tall, unfazed. I was simply informing her that the footage I recorded will be sent to the airline's corporate board. And she, Sophia pointed directly at Lisa, should prepare for a formal investigation. Lisa's face drained of color. You can't do that. Sophia crossed her arms. I absolutely can. Did you think that just because I'm not a person of color, I'd automatically take your side? Think again. The tension in the cabin reached a boiling point. Some passengers murmured among themselves, while others pulled out their phones, possibly recording this very moment. David Brooks returned, looking noticeably uneasy. He leaned down and whispered to Lisa, but I heard every word. We're in trouble. The supervisor says you need to stay calm. Lisa clenched her jaw. I didn't do anything wrong. I took a deep breath and looked straight at Lisa. I gave you a chance to stop. You chose to keep going. Lisa turned to me, her voice shaky but still laced with defiance. You can't do anything to me, I smirked. Are you sure about that? And at that moment, a new voice came over the plane's intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mark Henderson speaking. We have received reports regarding a situation on this flight. Upon landing, our airline's management team will be addressing this matter with the highest level of seriousness. Lisa froze. Her face went ghostly pale, her lips parting as if she wanted to protest. But no words came out. I calmly returned to my seat, leaned back, and took another sip of my drink. The tension in the first-class cabin had reached its breaking point. Whispers spread through the rows, sharp gazes flickered, and fingers darted across phone screens. I had no doubt that several passengers were recording every moment of this unfolding drama. Lisa remained frozen in place, her face drained of color, while David Brooks shifted uneasily, glancing around as if searching for an escape route. I placed my glass down, watching silently, waiting for their next move. The intercom had gone silent, but its impact still lingered. The captain had intervened. That meant the game had now escalated to an entirely different level. Sophia stood beside me, her piercing gaze locked onto Lisa. Do you have anything to say? Lisa turned to David, but he simply shook his head. She inhaled deeply, as if gathering herself, then suddenly raised her voice in an attempt to regain control. I was just doing my job. If anyone is unhappy, that's not my fault. Jacob Lee let out a dry chuckle, crossing his arms. Really? You spilled water on a passenger. You refused to serve him. You deliberately made things difficult. And now you're playing the victim? Lisa snapped her head toward him. Stay out of this! Double asterisk. I tilted my head slightly, my voice steady, but carrying weight. Have you ever wondered why so many people are speaking out against you? Lisa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I continued. Did you think I didn't notice the way you looked at me when I boarded? Did you think I didn't realize how differently you treated me? Did you think I wasn't aware that you targeted me from the moment I stepped onto this plane? I stood up, pulling at my still damp shirt. But I'm not the only one who noticed. I'm not the first victim, and I certainly won't be the last. Lisa swallowed hard, taking a step back. I didn't mean to. Sophia scoffed. Are you sure about that? Before Lisa could respond, a man from the back of the cabin stood up. He was well-dressed, middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and the air of a businessman. Excuse me, but I think it's time I speak up. All eyes turned to him. Lisa's expression twisted into barely concealed panic. My name is Ryan Cole, he announced. And I've been watching everything unfold. Double asterisk. Lisa started to speak, but he raised a hand, silencing her. I've been a loyal customer of this airline for years, and I can tell you, this isn't the first time I've seen something like this happen. David Brooks interjected hastily. Mr. Cole, I don't think. Ryan arched a brow. You don't think I should tell the truth? David fell silent. Ryan turned to me. Nathan Carter, right? I believe I've heard that name before. I met his gaze and smirked. I'm sure you have. Recognition flickered in Ryan's eyes, but he didn't press the subject. Instead, he looked back at Lisa. I've seen you treat passengers this way before, but this time it looks like you picked the wrong target. Lisa stammered. I didn't. The first-class cabin door suddenly swung open. A man in a pilot's uniform stepped inside. Captain Mark Henderson. The entire cabin fell into a stunned silence. Mark's eyes scanned the room, lingering on me before shifting to Lisa and David. His face betrayed no emotion. I need to have a word with a few people, he said in a firm, measured voice. Lisa White, David Brooks, and Mr. Carter. Double asterisk. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, whispering, Don't worry, I've got everything recorded. I gave her a slight nod before following the captain. Lisa walked ahead, her steps unsteady. David trailed behind her, his eyes darting around as if looking for an exit from this situation. Once the door to the cockpit area closed, Mark turned to face us. Explain. Lisa immediately jumped in, her voice trembling. Captain, I was just... Mark held up a hand, cutting her off. Not you. I want to hear from Mr. Carter first. I met his gaze without hesitation. What exactly do you want to know? Mark crossed his arms. I want to know what's happening on my flight, and I want to know if I'm about to be dealing with a lawsuit. I chuckled lightly. That depends on how you handle this situation. Mark exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. He turned to Lisa and David. What the hell did you two do? Lisa opened her mouth, but Mark shook his head. Number, I don't want excuses. I've already received reports from multiple passengers, and I've seen the video someone sent to corporate headquarters before we even land. Lisa's breath hitched. What? Double asterisk. David's jaw dropped. That's impossible. Mark spoke slowly, his tone firm. Corporate has already received a formal complaint, and I've been given direct orders from the board. Both of you will be suspended immediately upon landing. Lisa wobbled as if her legs might give out. No, this can't be happening. Mark looked back at me. Mr. Carter, I want to make sure our airline still has a chance to make things right. I considered my words carefully, then spoke evenly. I'm not someone who seeks out conflict, but I do believe in fairness. I turned my gaze toward Lisa, locking eyes with her. And fairness will be served. Double asterisk. Lisa shook her head repeatedly, as if refusing to believe what she had just heard. Her voice wavered with panic as she turned to Mark. Captain, I didn't do anything wrong. This is just a misunderstanding. David, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, quickly chimed in. I was just following protocol. We didn't mean any harm. Mark crossed his arms, his gaze firm. I watched the video. I've heard complaints from multiple passengers. There's no room for excuses. Lisa's eyes darted around, desperately seeking someone, anyone, to take her side. but no one spoke up. Everyone had turned their backs on her. I stepped forward, slowly and deliberately. You thought you could do whatever you wanted without consequences, didn't you? Lisa spun toward me, her eyes blazing with anger. You're just exploiting this situation. You're only able to do this because you're someone important. If you were just an ordinary person, no one would care about this. Double asterisk. I narrowed my eyes. What did you just say? Lisa clenched her fists, her voice trembling. If you weren't powerful, you wouldn't have been able to do anything. You're just using your status to punish us. I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. I don't need status to hold you accountable. You did that to yourself. Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew I was right. Mark exhaled deeply, looking between Lisa and David. When we land, both of you will be escorted out and immediately relieved of your duties. The airline's board of directors will determine what happens next. Lisa's breathing became shallow, her eyes wide like an animal backed into a corner. You can't do this to me. I've worked here for 6 years. Mark cut her off, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. And you destroyed it all in a single flight. David lowered his head. He knew it was over. Lisa's hands trembled as she balled them into fists. Then, suddenly, she turned toward me, her eyes burning with pure hatred. You'll regret this. I swear it. I met her glare with calm indifference. I have nothing to regret here. Mark signaled for security. 2 security officers entered the cabin, instructing Lisa and David to follow them. Lisa struggled, but had no other choice. Just before stepping through the door, she turned back one last time. A look of sheer resentment in her eyes. David said nothing. He simply lowered his head and followed. The door closed behind them. Outside, I could hear the murmurs of passengers in the cabin. Everyone understood they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Mark looked at me and gave a slight nod. Mr. Carter, I hope our airline can make this right. Double asterisk. I returned a faint smile. That depends on how you choose to fix it. As I settled back into my seat, I let out a slow breath. Sophia Green, who had captured the entire ordeal on video, calmly slipped her phone back into her pocket. I think you just taught them a lesson they won't forget. Jacob Lee nodded. A lesson they should have learned a long time ago. Double asterisk. I took a sip of my water, my gaze drifting out the airplane window. Justice had finally been served. But I knew this was just one small victory in a much bigger fight. A fight I was ready to face. As the cockpit door closed behind Lisa and David, I could feel the atmosphere on the plane shift. The passengers who had been silently observing now began murmuring among themselves. Some looked at me with admiration, while others lowered their heads, perhaps realizing they had remained silent in the face of injustice for too long. Sophia Green, still standing nearby, spoke slowly. You just did something very few people dare to do. Double asterisk. I looked at her, raising an eyebrow. You think so? She smiled, her eyes gleaming. I know so. Jacob Lee also chimed in, nodding. This is a significant moment. I've witnessed discrimination many times, but this is the first time I've seen someone not only stand up, but actually win. I leaned back in my seat, folding my arms. This isn't a victory yet. This is just part of a much bigger battle. Double asterisk. Sophia tilted her head. What do you mean? I met her gaze, my voice steady and resolute. I can't guarantee that others won't face what I did, but I can guarantee that from today, SkyLux Airlines will never forget this incident. Jacob chuckled, raising his glass of wine. I look forward to that day. Double asterisk. Sophia studied me curiously. Are you planning to do something else? I took a sip of water, eyes drifting to the plane's window. We'll find out soon enough. Double asterisk. As soon as the plane landed, a group of men in black suits awaited us at the aircraft's exit. They weren't regular airport staff. They were senior executives from SkyLux Airlines. Captain Mark Henderson walked ahead of me, looking slightly tense. He whispered, "It seems this situation reached upper management faster than we expected." I shrugged. You can't keep things like this hidden forever, can you? Double asterisk. We stepped out of the aircraft, and a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair approached, his professional but stiff smile firmly in place. Nathan Carter. He extended his hand. I shook it, narrowing my eyes slightly. And you are? Jonathan King, Director of Human Resources at SkyLux Airlines. We've been made aware of the incident on your flight. Sophia, walking beside me, murmured, They got the video. Jonathan cleared his throat and continued. We want to assure you that SkyLux Airlines does not tolerate any form of discrimination. Lisa White and David Brooks have been immediately suspended. An internal investigation will follow. I raised an eyebrow. And what about Captain Mark Henderson? He believed them without even checking the facts. Double asterisk. Mark shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Jonathan briefly glanced at Mark before turning back to me. Mr. Carter, I assure you that everyone involved will be held accountable. Double asterisk. I folded my arms. Good. Because this isn't just about me. This is about the thousands of passengers who have faced discrimination but couldn't speak up. Jonathan nodded. We understand, and we want to do the right thing. I gave a dry smile. Then do it. But don't expect me to just sit back and wait. Double asterisk. Sophia interjected, raising her phone. I recorded everything, and I can take this story to the press if SkyLux Airlines doesn't respond appropriately. Jonathan took a deep breath, then nodded. Mr. Carter, we will be in touch as soon as possible. I nodded and walked away. I didn't need empty promises. I needed action. 2 days later, I received a call from the ADU, Chairman of the SkyLux Airlines Board of Directors. Mr. Carter, we'd like to invite you to a private meeting. I smirked. The game wasn't over yet. I arrived at SkyLux Airlines' headquarters in New York. As I stepped into the luxurious conference room, I scanned the faces around me. Jonathan King, Mark Henderson, and 3 other board members were present. The chairman, seated at the head of the table, eyed me cautiously. Mr. Carter, we understand that you have every right to be dissatisfied with your recent flight experience. Double asterisk. I sat down, arms crossed. I'm not dissatisfied. I'm outraged. A woman on the board adjusted her glasses and quickly spoke. We want to correct our mistake, and we'd like to propose a partnership. I raised an eyebrow. A partnership? Jonathan King cleared his throat. You're a highly influential figure in the aviation industry, and we believe you can help SkyLux improve our customer service policies. We'd like to invite you to be an official advisor for our new training program. I let out a short laugh. That's a nice offer. But is it actually about change, or just about protecting SkyLux's reputation? The chairman took a sip of water, then looked me straight in the eye. What if I said both? I leaned back, considering his words. This wasn't just about my personal experience. This was an opportunity to push for real change. I clasped my hands together and spoke slowly. I'll accept, but on one condition. Double asterisk. The room fell silent. What condition? I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. Lisa White and David Brooks aren't just fired. They're blacklisted from working in any airline for at least 10 years. A slight wave of shock rippled through the room. Jonathan looked around before turning back to me. You really want to go that far? I smirked. If you're serious about change, then this is the right place to start. The room remained still. The chairman exhaled deeply, then nodded. We will consider your request. I stood up, buttoning my blazer. Good. Then we have a deal. Double asterisk. I shook hands with each person in the room before walking out of SkyLux Airlines' headquarters. I knew that the fight against injustice wouldn't end in a day. But today, I had won a battle, and I knew there were many more victories to come. As I stepped out of the SkyLux Airlines headquarters, I took a deep breath. The winter air in New York was brutally cold, but inside I felt an unusual warmth. One meeting was over, but I knew this was just the beginning. I opened my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and turned on my phone. A message from Sophia was already waiting. Sophia, how did it go? Did they accept your terms? I smirked, typing back slowly. But for now, it seems they don't have much of a choice. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. I answered, and Sophia's voice came through immediately. So, did they agree to blacklist Lisa and David? I made the demand, but they didn't confirm right away. They said they'd review it, which means they need time to figure out how to handle it without damaging the airline's image. Sophia sighed. I figured they'd try to minimize the fallout. I chuckled. Of course, that's how corporations operate, but I won't let them forget about this. Do you have a plan? She asked. Let me handle it. I'm not in a rush. There was a brief silence before she spoke again. I know you're smart enough to stay ahead of them, but if you need anything, I'm always ready to help. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thanks, Sophia. The call ended. I leaned my head back against the seat for a moment, watching the traffic move in waves outside. SkyLux Airlines might think they could stall this situation, but they had no idea that I already had another plan in motion. I scrolled through my contacts and tapped on a familiar name. After 3 rings, a deep, steady voice answered. Nathan Carter. Been a while. I smirked. Hello, Marcus. I need a favor. Marcus Reynolds was a veteran investigative journalist, someone who wasn't afraid to dig into the secrets that powerful corporations tried to bury. If anyone could force SkyLux Airlines to act faster, it was him. Marcus chuckled. Let me guess. This has something to do with your recent flight. I see you've been keeping up with the news. Of course, your story is already making waves on social media, but it looks like SkyLux Airlines is trying to control the narrative before it blows up. I nodded. Exactly. And I need you to make sure they can't bury this. Marcus paused, then asked, How deep do you want me to dig? I started the car, pulling out of the parking lot. Find out how many passengers have filed complaints against SkyLux Airlines for discrimination. I'm sure Lisa and David aren't the only ones in their system. Marcus let out a low whistle. So, you want to hit the root of the problem? That's right. If I focus only on Lisa and David, the airline can just fire them and claim problem solved. But if there's a systemic issue, they won't be able to just sacrifice a couple of pawns to protect their image. Marcus chuckled. You never play a simple game, do you? I smiled. You know me. Marcus promised to get back to me within a week. I had no doubt he'd deliver. After the call, I drove to my hotel. But as soon as I stepped into the lobby, a receptionist approached me. Mr. Carter, there's someone waiting for you at the bar. I frowned. Who? He didn't leave a name, just said that you'd want to hear what he has to say. Curious, but cautious, I made my way toward the bar. As I approached, I saw a middle-aged man in a sleek black suit nursing a glass of red wine. The moment he spotted me, he smiled and gestured for me to sit. I pulled out a chair across from him. How can I help you? The man set down his glass, his voice calm yet deliberate. No, Mr. Carter, I'm here to help you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, and who exactly are you? He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. My name is Stephen Langley, and I used to be one of the senior executives at SkyLux Airlines. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was already racing. A former high-ranking official from SkyLux Airlines approaching me right after my battle with them? I took a sip of my drink, studying him carefully. So, Mr. Langley, what brings you here? Stephen smirked slightly. I think you should know a few things about how SkyLux Airlines really operates. A storm stirred inside me. This story had just entered Baden. A whole new chapter, and it looked like I was about to uncover far more than I had anticipated. I set my glass of wine down, my eyes never leaving Stephen Langley. This man didn't just appear by coincidence. I was certain he had a clear reason for wanting to meet me. So, I said, my voice calm but probing, you want to talk about SkyLux Airlines? I'm listening. Stephen glanced around the bar, as if ensuring no one was eavesdropping, then leaned in slightly. Mr. Carter, what you experienced on that flight is just the tip of the iceberg, he said, his voice low but firm. I folded my arms. The tip? What do you mean? Stephen took a small sip of his wine, exhaled deeply, then continued. I was once the director of internal operations at SkyLux. My job was to oversee customer complaints, particularly issues related to service and personnel. I frowned slightly. So that means you were aware of Lisa White and David Brooks's discriminatory behavior? Stephen nodded. Not just them. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of similar complaints over the years. A wave of anger stirred inside me. Thousands? Yes. And this is what the airline has been doing. Ignoring or covering up every single one. I sat up straighter. You're telling me that SkyLux Airlines has a systemic discrimination problem. And they've deliberately done nothing about it? Stephen smirked bitterly, but there was a deep resentment in his eyes. They've done more than just ignore it, Carter. They've manipulated data, erased reports, and created internal policies to protect bad employees, as long as it didn't hurt the company's bottom line. I went silent for a moment. This was something I had suspected, but hearing it confirmed from an insider changed everything. Do you have proof? I asked. Stephen pulled out his phone, scrolled briefly, then placed it in front of me. The screen displayed a long list of passenger complaints, each one accusing SkyLux employees of racial discrimination or unfair treatment. But what made my stomach tighten wasn't the sheer number of complaints. It was the pall-eyed status of each case listed next to them. Closed, no action taken. Closed, no evidence, evidence removed. Closed, passenger overreacted. Closed, not a serious issue. Line after line, like a slap in the face. I looked up at Stephen. They dismissed all of these. He nodded. Not only that, but they also intimidated employees who tried to report the truth to higher-ups. Some people were even fired for speaking out. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to remain composed. "So why are you telling me this now?" Stephen sighed, leaning back. I stayed silent for too long. I knew what they were doing was wrong, but I convinced myself that I couldn't change anything. But when I saw your story explode in the media, I knew it was time to do the right thing. I stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "So, you want to help me bring them down?" Stephen let out a small chuckle. "I don't want to bring anyone down, but I do want to force them to change." I remained quiet, considering my next move. If what he was saying was true, and I had no reason to doubt him, then SkyLux Airlines was sitting on a scandal far bigger than they could ever contain. I picked up his phone, scanning the list of ignored complaints. "If I make this public, SkyLux won't be able to sweep it under the rug." Stephen nodded. "But you have to do it the right way. If you just dump this on social media, they'll spin it, claim the reports are outdated or unreliable." I nodded. "I need a strategy." Stephen smirked. "And I think you already know who can help you with that." A small smile crept onto my lips. "Marcus Reynolds." Stephen nodded. "Exactly. A strong investigative journalist like Marcus can turn this into a full-scale exposé. If we can gather affected passengers, get testimonies from former employees, and release internal evidence, SkyLux won't have an escape route." I studied him for a moment, then extended my hand. "I won't let them get away with this, but I need you to come forward as a witness." Stephen inhaled deeply before gripping my hand firmly. "I'm ready." We released our handshake. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. After 3 rings, he answered. "Nathan Carter. What's new?" I smirked. "I've got someone you need to meet, and I think you'll want to hear what he has to say." Marcus chuckled. "I'm on my way." I ended the call, set my phone down, and turned back to Stephen. "We're about to start a war. Are you sure you're ready?" Stephen took a slow sip of his wine, then smirked confidently. "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." I leaned back, taking a sip of my whiskey, my eyes drifting toward the glowing skyline of New York City. SkyLux Airlines had made a fatal mistake, thinking they could silence me. Now, they were about to learn the hard way that they picked the wrong man to fight. 3 days after my meeting with Yodid and Stephen Langley, I sat in a small conference room in downtown New York. Across from me was Marcus Reynolds, his notebook in hand, eyes gleaming like a hunter who had just spotted his prize. Stephen Langley sat beside him, tense but resolute. Marcus set his pen down, folding his arms. I just went through everything Langley provided. If what's in here is real, we're sitting on a media bomb. Taftit. I took a sip of my coffee, keeping my voice steady. I don't doubt its authenticity. The real question is, how do we detonate this bomb? Marcus smirked, his sharp gaze meeting mine. I have a few ideas. Stephen straightened up, his tone slow but firm. SkyLux Airlines has been burying this problem for too long. If we don't handle this right, they'll find a way to spin the story in their favor. I nodded. Exactly. They have a professional PR team. If we don't strike the right way, they'll frame this as isolated incidents and move on. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Then we need to build public pressure before they have a chance to react. I narrowed my eyes. Be specific. Marcus flipped open his notebook, pointing to a list. I've identified over 50 passengers who previously filed complaints about discriminatory behavior on SkyLux Airlines. However, only a handful are willing to go public. Stephen chimed in. What about employees? I know some former flight attendants were pressured to cover up their colleagues' misconduct. Marcus nodded. I've managed to contact 3 former employees. They're willing to talk, but only if we guarantee anonymity until the article is published. I crossed my arms, thinking, good, we have witnesses, we have internal evidence, but I want something SkyLux Airlines can't refute. Marcus smiled. What are you thinking? I looked straight at him. An internal recording. Or an email from upper management. Anything proving that they deliberately buried these complaints. Stephen went quiet for a moment, then suddenly looked up, his eyes gleaming with an idea. I can get it. Marcus glanced at him with interest. Are you sure? Stephen nodded, his expression serious. I used to have access to SkyLux's internal email system. I may not work there anymore, but I still have a few old allies. If they can retrieve an internal email admitting that SkyLux Airlines covered up these complaints, that would be a death sentence for them. I leaned forward, my voice lowering. Do it. As soon as possible. Stephen took a deep breath and stood up. Give me 2 days. I shook his hand. We're getting closer to the truth. After Stephen left, Marcus turned to me. Carter, if we take this public, do you realize how big the consequences will be? I smirked. Marcus, I'm not doing this to take down an airline. I'm doing this to force them to change. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. I like your style. I'll get the article ready. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Sophia Green. Me. Get ready. A storm is coming. She replied almost instantly. Sophia. I never miss a storm. 2 days later, I received an email from Stephen. I got it. Meet me at the old cafe. I arrived at a quiet coffee shop in Brooklyn, a place discreet enough for a private discussion. Stephen was already seated, a small USB drive in his hand. I pulled up a chair, locking eyes with him. Tell me. Stephen lowered his voice. I asked an old friend inside SkyLux Airlines to dig through the internal archives. And guess what I found? He plugged the USB into his laptop and pulled up an email. I skimmed through it, my eyes narrowing. We cannot allow this to spread. If necessary, settle complaints discreetly. No official reports of discrimination should remain in our system. The sender? Jonathan King. The Departure Head of Human Resources at SkyLux Airlines. The same man who had promised me that the company would handle this issue transparently. I clenched my fists. He lied. Stephen nodded. And now we have proof. I immediately grabbed my phone and called Marcus. He picked up after 2 rings. "Talk to me." I spoke quickly. "I have an internal email from SkyLux's HR director, ordering the cover-up of all discrimination complaints." Marcus was silent for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Damn, Carter. You just put SkyLux Airlines in a chokehold on the front page." I smirked. "Get the article ready. We're dropping this immediately." Marcus chuckled. "How do you want to play it? Do I run a full-scale exposé, or do we just leak the email directly to the media?" I paused for a second, then replied slowly, "Do both." Marcus let out a low whistle. "I like your style." 3 days later, Marcus's article hit the front page of the New York Times, accompanied by the leaked internal email. SkyLux Airlines plunged into crisis mode. Overnight, Jonathan King was immediately suspended. Lisa White and David Brooks were permanently banned from the airline industry. SkyLux Airlines' stock dropped significantly within 24 hours. Captain Mark Henderson was forced to make a public apology. And me? I didn't care about their apologies. I only cared that justice was served. But I knew this wasn't over yet. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Stephen and Marcus. "They'll strike back. Be ready. We're not done yet." SkyLux Airlines plunged into a media firestorm. The moment Marcus Reynolds's article was published in the New York Times, major news outlets, TV channels, and social media exploded with reports exposing the airline's systematic cover-up of discrimination complaints. TV broadcasts repeatedly aired headlines like, "SkyLux Airlines accused of covering up widespread discrimination. Leaked internal emails from HR Director Jonathan King spark public outrage." SkyLux Airlines stock plummeted nearly 15% in a single day, and flight cancellations surged as passengers lost trust in the brand. I sat in my office, watching the news flash across the screen. Across from me, Stephen Langley leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "They won't sit back and take this, Nathan." I took a slow sip of my coffee, voice steady. "I know." Sophia Green entered, laptop in hand. "They've already started pushing back." Stephen and I immediately turned toward her. Sophia placed her laptop on the desk and hit play on a Setito, newly released SkyLux Airlines PR video. On the screen, Richard von Bonalandu, the airline's CEO, sat upright in a tailored suit, his expression somber. "We categorically reject the allegations that SkyLux Airlines has a systemic discrimination problem. The incidents in question do not reflect our company culture. The leaked email was part of an internal investigation but has been taken out of context." I let out a dry chuckle. "They're trying to calm the storm." Stephen clenched his jaw. "Not just that. They're twisting the truth to protect their reputation." Sophia's fingers flew across her keyboard. "They've hired a crisis PR firm. I just got word that they're preparing a wave of positive press pieces and interviews to shift the narrative in their favor." I folded my arms. "Then we need to get ahead of them." Sophia studied me intently. "What's the plan?" I exhaled slowly. "We need more than just documents. We need real voices, people who've been affected, speaking out publicly." Double asterisk. Stephen's eyes widened. You mean a press conference? I nodded. Not just one. We need a full-scale movement. If we can get enough victims and ex-employees to come forward, they won't be able to suppress the truth. Sophia hesitated for a beat, then grinned. All right, I'll reach out to the victims. Marcus identified. 2 days later, Hunterton Special Press Conference was held in Poors, downtown New York, where over 15 passengers and former employees of SkyLux Airlines came forward publicly. A black woman stepped up first, her voice filled with righteous anger. A SkyLux flight attendant once refused to serve me water, saying I was asking too much. But when the white passenger next to me asked, she handed him a drink without hesitation. Double asterisk. A middle-aged Asian man took the microphone next. I was singled out and asked for additional identification while boarding. No one else was questioned. They treated me like a suspect, just because I looked different. Then, an ex-SkyLux flight attendant, Emily Dawson, stepped forward, her hands shaking as she spoke. I was told by my superiors to ignore complaints from non-white passengers. When I refused, I was suddenly reassigned to lower priority flights without explanation. The room fell silent, then erupted in murmurs of outrage. Beside me, Sophia stood frozen, taking in the raw pain in their voices. Stephen sighed. No airline can recover from this. I turned toward the cameras, making direct eye contact with the audience watching live. SkyLux Airlines can deny the truth all they want, but the truth doesn't disappear. These people are living proof. We are not asking for sympathy. We are demanding justice. Applause thundered through the room. Within minutes, news outlets ran breaking headlines. #Justice for SkyLux Victims began trending worldwide. 3 days later, SkyLux Airlines faced a full-blown crisis. One of their owners, largest stakeholders, North Point Capital, announced they were litigants, reviewing their investment in the company. CEO Richard Vaughn was forced to hold an emergency board meeting, scrambling to contain the fallout. Jonathan King, the HR director, was officially fired. Lisa White and David Brooks were not only banned from working in the airline industry, they now faced lawsuits from passengers they had discriminated against. And me? I sat in my office, reading a freshly received email from SkyLux Airlines Executive Board. Mr. Carter, we would like to meet to discuss a resolution. I smirked. Finally, they caved. I grabbed my phone and called Sophia and Stephen. Get ready. We're about to decide the future of SkyLux Airlines. SkyLux Airlines was forced into a reckoning. Week after the negotiations, the airline publicly announced a complete restructuring of its leadership. CEO Richard Vaughn resigned, stepping down after 15 years of leading the company. The board appointed a new CEO, someone with no prior ties to the old administration, signaling a clean break from the past. SkyLux Airlines established an independent oversight committee, responsible for monitoring and enforcing new policies for the next 5 years. All employees underwent mandatory retraining to eliminate discrimination and improve customer service standards. Lisa White and David Brooks, the two employees whose actions ignited this firestorm, Sihintoiki Banadaki Chef were permanently banned from working in the airline industry. Jonathan King, the Attendant's former HR director who orchestrated the cover-up was barred from working in aviation for 10 years. And me? I stood at Wakes JFK Airport, watching passengers board a newly rebranded SkyLux Airlines flight. Sophia Green approached, standing beside me. Do you think they'll really change? I exhaled slowly. I don't believe in promises, but I believe in accountability. Marcus Reynolds joined us, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. Justice was finally served. I let out a small chuckle. Not over yet, but this is a good start. We stood there, watching the sky. SkyLux Airlines had changed. Not because they wanted to, because I made them. If I had stayed silent, if I had accepted the humiliation from Lisa White and David Brooks without fighting back, SkyLux Airlines would have continued operating the way they always had. But I chose not to stay silent. And that changed everything. SkyLux Airlines tried to use their influence and money to bury their mistakes. But in the end, they couldn't fight the truth. I didn't do this alone. Sophia, Marcus, Stephen, Seats, and Riti. Dozens of passengers stood with me to expose what was hidden for years. When people unite for justice, nothing is impossible. If you've made it this far, it means you care about justice. And we try to real change. But I can't do this alone. Share this story. Help it reach as many people as possible. Don't stay silent in the face of injustice. If you see something wrong, speak up. Follow this channel so you don't miss the next story. The truths that need to be exposed. Have you ever experienced a similar injustice? Comment below and share your story. Thank you for watching. Let's create real change together.